Who would have thought that a big, stupid, ugly ogre would become a pop culture juggernaut? Released in 2001, Shrek was a film that by all accounts should not have been as successful as it was. I mean, it had no dashing protagonist, no magical being that drastically helps change the course of the hero's journey, and no saccharinely sweet lesson at the end of the film where the hero finds out that what he wanted was inside of him all along. But it does have a singing princess, so semantics. Armed with a group of misfits to fill out the cast and crew, and a story with a lot of laughs and a surprising amount of heart, and a soundtrack that could bring some of film's greatest soundtracks to its knees, Shrek has endured the massive waves of pop culture and cemented itself as a benchmark in pop culture history. But how did Shrek become the world's most famous ogre? The story of how Shrek came to take over the world doesn't begin here. It actually begins similar to the beginning of the first film, with a book. William Steig was a New Yorker cartoonist turned author and was considered to be the king of cartoons. His work was a bit absurdist, a little off the beaten path, but enjoyed by both kids and the adults who were reading his books to them. Steig had released such classics as Yellow and Pink, Dr. DeSoto, Brave Irene, and on October 17, 1990, his book Shrek was released. If you can believe it, Shrek in Shrek is worse than Shrek in Shrek. Don't believe me? Allow me to read you the first page. His mother was ugly and his father was ugly, but Shrek was uglier than the two of them put together. By the time he toddled, Shrek could spit a flame a full 99 yards and vent smoke from either ear. With just a look, he cowed the reptiles in the swamp. Any snake dumb enough to bite him instantly got convulsions and died. For lack of a better term, Shrek is an absolute menace in the book Shrek. He literally saunters through the forest, spitting literal fire and eating lightning bolts. Really good lesson for the kids, I think. The story is rather simple. Shrek is sent out into the forest and he comes upon a witch. He asks the witch to tell him his future. She tells him that a donkey will take him on a journey to meet a princess who is uglier than him. He continues on his journey, he meets the donkey, he fights a knight, he discovers mirrors for the first time, and then he meets his princess. They marry and they live horribly ever after. By 1991, the rights for the book had been sold and purchased with the intent to turn it into a film. The buyer? Just an indie director by the name of Steven Spielberg. You probably haven't heard of him. Spielberg is as much of a prolific producer as he is a director. Spielberg has always been a pretty strong proponent for animation, and he has executive producer credits on some of the 80s and 90s biggest animated projects in both film and TV. This includes The Land Before Time, The Animaniacs, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Freakazoid, and Tiny Toon Adventures, among a lot of other things.
Oh, just ask him.
We were just wondering, who's your favorite?
Who are you people?
This is just me geeking out about Spielberg, but he also has executive producer credits on the Transformers movies, the live-action Flintstones movies, and Poltergeist. He's a legend, what can I say? He intended for Shrek to be for his animation studio, Amblimation, which was a branch of his production studio, Amblin Entertainment. Amblimation made such classics as An American Tail, Five Will Goes West, We're Back, A Dinosaur Story, which was technically the second dinosaur-related project that he was tied to in 1993. The man loves his dinos. And Balto. What we know about Amblimation's version of Shrek was that it was going to be a 2D animated film, and it was set to have Bill Murray and Steve Martin in lead roles, presumably as Shrek and Donkey. Production-wise, it just never got off the ground, so it was canned. Canned until 1994. In 1984, CEO of the Walt Disney Company Michael Eisner appointed Jeffrey Katzenberg to head a failing motion picture and feature animation department. Under Katzenberg's leadership, Disney turned out some of its biggest hits, including The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin. Katzenberg was always a controversial character within the company, and by 1994, those tensions came to a boiling point. During this time, a lot of the checks and balances from the Disney C-suite came from the duo of CEO Michael Eisner and president of the company, Frank Wells. Eisner often had massive ideas, some great, some good, a lot awful, and Wells was able to sift through those ideas and find gold. They were a team, and they were able to head the company during some of its most successful years. On April 3rd, 1994, returning from a ski trip, Frank Wells and 3 others died in a helicopter accident in Nevada. On April 4th, while having dinner at his son's house, Eisner received a call about Wells, his business partner of 10 years' sudden death. By 6 a.m. on April 5th, Katzenberg was awaiting a call from Eisner saying that he would be appointed to president of the company in Wells' absence, a position he had been lobbying for as early as a year before Wells' death. In October of 1993, Katzenberg and Eisner had a conversation about Katzenberg becoming president of the company, where Eisner said, quote, "If for any reason Frank is not here, you are the number 2 person and I want you to have the job." Eisner later called that a misunderstanding. Needless to say, the call never came, and not too long after, Katzenberg left Disney. Pissed off, angry, and having quite literally nothing to lose, Katzenberg rallied together his industry buddies David Geffen and Steven Spielberg, and together they created DreamWorks SKG. To say that this was a company partially formed in spite is a bit of an understatement. Katzenberg wanted to watch Disney burn, professionally of course, and he was willing to do just about anything to make that happen. Remember this mouse tool. It's gonna help us later. Despite this unspoken mission statement of the studio, they did churn out some legitimately great hits, including The Prince of Egypt, which I think helped to legitimize the studio's reputation after the uncanny valley nightmare that was Ants. And they also made just fun films like The Road to El Dorado, which is good for more reasons than I currently have the capacity to say at this time, but I think we know why. And obviously by 2001, they had a hit on their hands. But as they say, Rome was not built in a day. So we established that Spielberg had purchased the rights for the book in 1991 and tried to make the film, but just couldn't get it off the ground. So his option for the rights expired and Shrek was up for grabs again. In the early days of DreamWorks, producer John H. Williams' kids actually got a hold of the Shrek book too, and they loved it, and eventually Williams himself loved it. This is what he had to say about what drew him to the story. "Every development deal starts with a pitch, and my pitch came from my then kindergartner in collaboration with his preschool brother. Upon our second reading of Shrek, the kindergartner started quoting large segments of the book, pretending he could read them. Even as an adult, I thought Shrek was outrageous, irreverent, iconoclastic, gross, and just a lot of fun. He was a great movie character in search of a movie." Katzenberg was intrigued. It was a great story, but the irreverence of the character opened up the possibility of creating a film that could be the perfect counter to Disney's wholesome and sweet Renaissance-era films. Katzenberg wanted Shrek to rip that idea to shreds. Remember that mouse tool from earlier? This is it. The rights were purchased and production started again on Shrek in 1995. In the beginning days of the film, there was almost a revolving door of filmmakers put on the project, and it could definitely be deduced that the still growing DreamWorks Animation Studio approached staffing the film by putting any warm body on the project. Shrek was never truly a priority project for the studio. Yes, Katzenberg saw the potential of Shrek enough to purchase the rights to it, but the focus of early DreamWorks was animation for adults, and they definitely attempted that, especially with Ants and The Prince of Egypt. Much of the studio's focus was put onto The Prince of Egypt, which was meant to be an epic of biblical proportions that was going to serve as DreamWorks' coming out party, and a way to show that they were a studio not to be reckoned with. I honestly think the most interesting thing about that movie was that in strategizing how DreamWorks was going to beat Disney, DreamWorks, specifically Jeffrey Katzenberg, basically said that they were going to beat Disney with 3 things: a star-studded cast, an immaculate soundtrack, and literally God. So obviously they had their hands pretty full with achieving that. There were rumors that Shrek was seen as the detention of DreamWorks, and that animators who weren't doing well on other projects were sent to work on Shrek as a sort of pseudo-punishment. This may sound cruel, but the same thing happened during the making of The Lion King. During its production, it and Pocahontas were being animated at the same time. So the supposed A team of animators went to go work on Pocahontas, and the supposed B team went to go work on The Lion King. The Lion King became the highest grossing 2D animated film of all time, and Pocahontas is a movie that happened. So this happening on Shrek was definitely not a bad sign. In fact, without having the watchful eye of the studio on them 24/7, this meant that they could be a little bit more creative. So creative that the Shrek team briefly flirted with the idea of using motion capture technology to animate the film. This is what editor Sam Evan Jones had to say about the whole ordeal. It was basically going to be shot motion capture by these guys called the Propeller Heads. There were the three guys that we knew, Rob Lauderman, Lauren Soman, and Andy Weisler, and then there was this guy back in New York who was the writer. It turned out the writer was J.J. Abrams. Abrams wrote the test we did motion capture on. It was like 45 seconds. What they wanted to do was use puppets for the four-legged characters. They had people in fat suits, and it was just a big fat mess. Okay, so motion capture was out, but this did open the door for them to use a still relatively new piece of technology, computer-generated imagery. Though the film's team was still being assembled, it finally got a director or directors in Andrew Adamson and Vicki Jensen in 1997. Story-wise, the lack of studio supervision allowed for the filmmakers to make the film funny. The only problem was, who was the film supposed to be funny for? Kids or adults? Katzenberg wanted both, while the crew wanted to lean more towards adults. Eventually, they were able to all agree on an adult comedy that was accessible to kids versus the usual kids comedy that was accessible to adults. The production on the film was underway, the story was taking shape, and now they needed a cast. Allegedly, Nicolas Cage was initially offered the role of Shrek, but turned it down. The role then went to comedian Chris Farley. In fact, Farley had recorded nearly all of his lines for the film.
And our top story we've just learned about in the past hour. Comedian and actor Chris Farley is dead. His body was found today inside a Chicago apartment building. The cause of death is not yet known. He was 33 years old.
In the wake of Farley's death, the film had to recast their lead role rather quickly, and they found their new Shrek and Farley's fellow SNL alumni, Mike Myers. However, with a recast came a complete rewrite. When Myers joined the project, he didn't just want to finish the job that Farley had left. He wanted Shrek to be his own character, so he requested that they completely rewrite the script. And DreamWorks said, "Sure, Mike. We can do that." It is interesting because Myers wanted his performance to reflect a kind of lower class versus upper class dichotomy with Shrek and Lord Farquaad. So initially he recorded his lines in his native Canadian accent, but after some thinking and a test screening in February of 2000, he thought that a Scottish accent would be a better kind of working class accent and requested to re-record his lines.
No, we like it the way it is. And I said, oh, come on, just let me. Steven Spielberg said, well, why don't you try it once? Sent me a lovely letter, Steven Spielberg, saying, you're so right. It's way better as Scottish. Thank you so much. They spent some money, but not the amount of money that has been reported in the press, I'd like to point out. And by the way, I recorded it all for free one more time, and just happy to do so because I wanted it to be good. There we have Shrek being Scottish.
The rest of the cast filled out with Eddie Murphy as Donkey, Cameron Diaz as Princess Fiona, and John Lithgow as Lord Farquaad. Through a labor of love and an absolutely insane production journey, DreamWorks was finally ready to release Shrek in May of 2001, and I don't think they had any idea what they were about to unleash. Why do we love the first Shrek movie? This is a question that is quite literally the reason why this entire video exists. I have seen the movie dozens of times, thousands it feels, and it never fails to make me laugh really hard with Shrek and Donkey's banter. It never fails to fill my heart with joy when Shrek and Fiona are beginning to fall in love with each other for the first time and they accept each other. And I do all of this while reciting every single word of the script. So I don't have a definitive answer as to why we still love the first Shrek movie, but here's some thoughts that I have as to maybe why. First is the timing. The film came out after a 10-year long of albeit excellent Disney movies with the Disney Renaissance. And while we got some great films, I think there was an audience fatigue with the traditional musical, romance, and the cutesy happily ever after type of movie. Shrek came at a perfect time because it was the antithesis of the Disney film. The main character is not conventionally attractive, he doesn't sing, and he's actually kind of a dick. However, he still gets his version of a happily ever after, just not one that we're used to. Second is the soundtrack. In my opinion, Shrek is an excellent example of a really good soundtrack for a blockbuster film. I am in a very small group of people that believe that one singular pop song on a film soundtrack doesn't completely degrade the quality of the film. Not only with All Star, obviously, but there are some great songs that embody the heart and soul of the film while also pushing the plot along. Let's go through a couple of them, starting with the first song on the film soundtrack, Stay Home by Self. This song may not be most recognizable as it doesn't appear in the film until the credits, but it perhaps best describes the crux of who Shrek is as a person. It's got a very late 90s, early 2000s pop punk sound. They don't want to go out, they don't want to play, they just want to be left alone. That's classic Shrek. In the middle of the film, when Shrek and Fiona begin to fall for each other, we get My Beloved Monster by Eels. It's a love song with a very peculiar and irreverent feel to it, using an eclectic mix of a Chamberlin keyboard and a banjo. The music ties perfectly together with the lyrics that describe someone who feels at peace when spending time with their beloved monster. I've always loved this song specifically because I feel like it definitely works from the perspective of Shrek being the beloved monster. But I also think it works on an extra layer with Fiona as the beloved monster too, especially with the reveal that she's an ogre, just like Shrek. And obviously, we cannot talk about the music of Shrek without talking about this. The song is synonymous with Shrek and definitely has contributed to the memification of the film that's happened in recent years, but similar to Stay Home and My Beloved Monster, the sound of it works very well with the film as a whole. All Star by Smash Mouth served as a way to open the film and understand some core traits about Shrek almost immediately. Shrek is not a monster who hides himself off from others because he believes he's this hideous, ugly beast. Well, he doesn't act like that outwardly anyways. The beginning montage of the film shows that Shrek is content with the life that he has in solitude, bathing in mud and dining on rats, which kind of look delicious, I'm not even gonna lie. All-Star's fun and a bit rebellious sound was perfect to introduce us to a character so sure of himself like Shrek. And actually, Smash Mouth served as the perfect band to function as musical bookends for the film. The film opens with this fun, raucous song about being an all-star, and it ends with Shrek being a believer in friendship, a believer in love, and a believer in himself. Third is the animation. For when it was being produced, the animation of Shrek still holds up pretty well. We have to remember that CGI as a whole is still relatively new, and CGI of the late 90s was great, but there weren't many fully CGI animated films up until that point. For its age, Shrek still looks pretty good, and that's because of the attention to detail from the animation team. They carefully studied patterns and textures, and some even took mud baths to understand how mud would move down the body. Which, okay, they were very committed, props to that, but it also does seem like they just wanted to play in mud, maybe. That's like me saying in order to achieve this video, I had to try and become an ogre, and I did try, and it's incredibly difficult. But in all seriousness, DreamWorks and their production partner Pacific Data Images, or PDI, used groundbreaking software to ensure that both the characters and their backgrounds were the perfect balance of realistic and stylized. It came through much trial and error, but in the end, I think it was worth it. And last but certainly not least is the writing. Like I mentioned earlier, Shrek isn't supposed to be super likable, but that is exactly why he is likable. His desire to be left alone is very relatable, and I think he feels that way because he feels that he doesn't deserve anything more than solitude. Shrek spends his whole life as we know it being judged before even being given a chance. And the minute he's not judged immediately, via Donkey, he starts on his journey of understanding his worth and learning that he's a monster who is capable and worthy of love and friendship. Industry vets kind of got a hold of the crazy production story of Shrek and immediately cast it off as this animated film that was going to be lost to time, and they would be lucky if they made back even half of their budget. And DreamWorks wasn't exactly in a rush to defend the film because even its executives thought that what Shrek wasn't an embodiment of what they thought would be a hit for the studio. But lucky for them, it absolutely paid off. If you can believe it, Shrek premiered at the 2001 Cannes Film Festival and actually competed for the prestigious Palme d'Or, becoming the second animated film to do so, the first being 1953's Peter Pan. If you don't know, Cannes is a very prestigious film festival out of France, and many of film's most elite go on to compete for the Palme d'Or. Notable winners of the Palme d'Or include Parasite, Pulp Fiction, The Piano, and now that I'm saying these out loud, it just seems like any film that starts with a P is a shoo-in for the Palme d'Or, which may or may not be true. I'm not at liberty to say. Shrek opened for wide release on May 18, 2001, pulling in $42 million in its opening weekend and a total box office number of $487.9 million. So it's safe to say that Shrek was a commercial success.
The nominees are Monsters Incorporated, Pete Docter and John Lasseter. Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius, Steve Odekirk and John A. Davis. Shrek, Aaron Warner. And the Oscar goes to Shrek, Aaron Warner.
Taking home the first ever Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, it was clear that DreamWorks had finally had their first hit, much to the thrill of its cast, crew, and executives, especially Jeffrey Katzenberg. The world was green, but not with envy, but instead admiration for our new favorite ogre. With a sequel that went into production almost immediately after the release of the first film, a theme park attraction, and a merchandising empire that could outrank some of history's biggest empires, we were a nation united under a big, stupid, ugly ogre.